The future has arrived. As the world and humanity itself moves faster and faster into unimaginable possibilities, old institutions that built connection and shaped our sense of meaning are falling by the wayside. In their wake, profound questions about ethics, our purpose, and spirituality demand new answers. Join your host, Scott Mason, in Season 2 of the Purpose Highway podcast. We will explore how these social changes will revolutionize our society. We will learn how they impact our own search for connection and meaning. And we will hear stories of influencers whose lives have had radical change from the inside and found profound connection to others and themselves through a new definition of meaning. The future has arrived. Are you ready?
When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is. Hey everybody, it's Scott Mason revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. Now, if you like what we're doing, be sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up on YouTube or a positive review on Apple. And sitting next to me today in the front seat is Anne Therese Gennari. Anne Therese is a speaker, educator, and environmental activist, and the founder of the Climate Optimist, a climate change education and communications company, as well as the founder of Role Models Management, an ethical modeling agency. She hosts an online community called The Collective and also the Hey Change podcast. And as you can tell, for those of you who are watching, she's got a generally fun personality, which is why we want her on this show, not to mention the amazing stuff that she has to say. Now, as an educator and a consultant, Anne Therese helps shift the narrative around climate change so that we can act from courage and excitement, not fear. Anne Therese, welcome to the show.
Scott, it's amazing to be here. Thank you.
Well, we are going to have a grand old time. We're going to learn a lot, and I am all stoked to roll up my sleeves and dig in. But before we get started, let's just get to know you a little bit. We know you're a climate change activist. We know you run a modeling agency, a podcast. We know you're a busy lady, but there is a goddess within. Who is that goddess? Anne Therese, tell us. We're chomping at the bit.
Well, so I'm from Sweden, so I'm Nordic. And so obviously I had to go to the Nordic goddesses and go see who really resonates with me. And honestly, it's Freya. I feel like Freya lives within me.
That is awesome. Now, for those of you who are listening, not those of you who are watching because you'll know the answer to this, but for those of you who are listening, Anne Therese looks exactly what you would think Freya would look like. Freya was the Norse goddess of love, and she wept golden tears when she was sad. I don't know if you do that. If you do, let us know the secret, because I need some extra gold in my pocket. And she had a carriage that was drawn by cats. She has an interesting backstory, and I'll just go into that briefly. In the Viking pantheon, there were actually 2 sets of gods. There were the Aesir that were the main ones. Odin and Thor were the principals there. And there were other gods called the Vanir. Now, no one really knows where the Vanir came from. They just sort of pop into the myths from this land, Vanaheim, that they lived in. And Freya was one of the Vanir gods. The Vanir gods governed fertility, agricultural fertility, animal fertility, but also human fertility, including things like light, the weather, and love. So Freya was the goddess of love. She was also a goddess of war. She originally came to the Aesir using a different name called Gullveig, and she got into good graces with them. However, the Aesir ultimately kind of thought she was causing strife, and so they burned her at the stake 3 times. The Vanir were furious, and they went to war with the Aesir. And eventually it was resolved by Freya and some of the other Vanir gods moving permanently into the home of the Aesir. There was a primary Aesir goddess named Frigg, but everyone seems to have forgotten about Frigg. It's all about Freya, 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 this goddess of love, war, and magic. Was the dominant Norse goddess. Magic, fertility, climate. Do they resonate together with you in any way, Anne Therese?
110%. As you're speaking, I'm like, of course I picked Freya. It makes a ton of sense. Also, I want to just go back to what you said in the beginning. I don't cry gold, but I will say that I have learned to understand that tears are gold in so many ways.
Wow.
And allowing ourselves to cry could be one of the most empowering things that we do. So it makes a lot of sense there too. Also, thank you for your lovely words. Yeah, what an awesome goddess. Yeah.
She's the best. Magic. Talk to me a little bit about to the extent that magic might speak to you, because one of the things that's interesting is that across cultures, perhaps not in every culture, but in a lot of cultures, magic is associated with femininity on some fundamental level. Love goddesses also seem to be more dominant than love gods, although love gods exist. Again, fertility, magic, climate. Does magic mean anything to you? Because some of what we're going to talk about as this goes on goes into the realm of the spiritual. And I don't know if you see any connection there or not, but I'd be curious if you do, or if you think I'm just being a loon again, because I've been known to be that.
Well, listen, you brought the right guest on this show. I speak of magic a lot, and I have been for many years. I love magic. I think so many things in life are magic, and there are multiple occasions where I literally have no better words than magic. You know, it's like, how do you explain the feeling you get when you take a pause when you're walking and you look at the sun streaming down through the leaves, and you hear the birds singing, and you feel that warm on your face? Like, what is that? It's magic, you know? And then there are, of course, like the more, maybe what people do associate with magic, when you think of a person and the next second he calls you up and you haven't spoken in 2 years, like that kind of thing. I'm very scientific. I'm all for science. I think we need to trust the scientists, especially with climate change. But I also think that there's a lot to give to magic. I mean, moving forward, and I think we're going to go deeper into these questions soon, but what is the path forward? Because we keep talking about what disasters we're trying to avoid by fighting climate change. And I think one of the things we keep missing is that as a species, we need to start choosing change. You know, there's a lot of possibilities on the road ahead, but in order to embrace that, it's going to take a lot of courage from us. And if you look back at any sort of history, or like what everything we've ever been through and gone through as a species, and as society and as human beings, it's all come from some sort of faith that something bigger than this is coming. And you have to take action step towards something into the unknown. And that is all tied to faith. And I think faith is very interlinked with magic in a way, where it's like, I don't really know what it is, but there's something bigger here. I know something bigger is coming. I know something better is possible. But if we only look at science, which is obviously really important and what has been and what is right now, but then we're keeping ourselves stuck in the now. And what we need to do moving forward is go into exploring what else is possible. And that is to bring magic into like the imagination of tomorrow and the better future. But also I think magic just brings a whole different lens of appreciating what we have right now, because so much around us is magic. You know, if that is just the connection to the person next to you on the street, or if that is feeling that, you know, I mean, I hug trees. I'm one of those weirdos where even in New York, I will go up and hug a tree. And you know, there's some sort of like exchange going on from me to this incredible being. And I don't know what that is. And there's so many things we can't put words to. And anytime I can't put words to it, I call it magic. So
I absolutely love that. And I can relate. Now, I'm not much of a plant person, I will admit, although I do think they're pretty. However, my husband in our little studio apartment keeps plants. And he and I were having a conversation just the other day about how he actually does feel a connection to these plants. He's not a spiritual person at all, but he does understand that to him, the plants need love. They need, on some level, to get a sense that they are being cared for, that they're being respected, that their needs are being met. And he puts a lot of energy and effort into them, and he loves them. He gets upset when they pass. And not surprisingly, perhaps, our plants do really well, even though we live in a studio with one window. And so I guess I can relate in my home life to what you're talking about. And speaking of magic, because it can seem like magic when we're talking about hope and faith in the future with regards to climate change, just explain to us briefly, what do you mean when you say you are the climate optimist?
So I was not a climate optimist for many years. I'll start right there. I was what I called an angry activist. I was very frustrated with myself, with the world. I was filled with a lot of despair. I was not very well aware, but I was aware enough of climate change at an early age. And I felt like no one around me cared enough, that politicians around the world did not care at all. And I was terrified of, you know, the future of a planet. And I thought that the only way to make a difference was to kind of stoop myself in that anger and despair and pull forth the force of like, we need something to change. And what happened was that, first of all, I was not very successful at converting, so to speak, anyone around me, because people don't want to hang out with angry people. I learned that the hard way. I also was not very kind to myself. I literally woke up in the morning and didn't feel like I deserved to be happy or well or have a good time, because I'm like, there are so many things that are wrong with the world. I feel very privileged living in a country like Sweden. I have all the things that I need. There are people suffering. There are animals going extinct. Who am I to have a good time? And really, it took a serious awakening. It was actually a moment of, I had a conversation with my brother at the dinner table, and it ended up with me on the floor in my parents' guest room, and I cried like I never cried before. It felt like the pain from the whole world that I had just kept bottling up inside for many years came out. It was just like, we can't hold on to this any longer. I say we because I think there's multiple versions of me inside me. And it was just time to let go. And after a session of crying for probably 15 minutes where I was completely paralyzed, I couldn't move my fingers, my arms. I was just sitting there kind of watching myself in third person as this went on. Afterwards, I landed in this feeling of being incredibly light. I saw this kind of dim white light around me, and this message came through. I don't know who sent it. So again, back to magic, or my higher self, where I was just in tuned or like finally surrendered enough where I could listen. And the message that came through was, you're here to be a climate optimist. You're here to work for climate. Yes, that's your kind of life purpose. That's what I got, but you're doing it the wrong way. And so that was in my early 20s, and I thought that sounded wonderful. I was like, yes, I've been given permission to smile again, to feel good about life, and to bring that into the world. However, I had no idea what being a climate optimist meant. And so that took me kind of many years to figure out. And in the beginning, I thought that the best way to be optimistic was to kind of just pick and choose whatever I was paying attention to. So ignore all the bad news and don't listen to the negative climate news and only focus on the few good things that actually are happening, because there are good climate news as well. And I thought if I just hold on to those nuggets of positivity and optimism and share those with the world, I could stay, I can be an optimist. I can stay optimistic. However, and this is what I learned, is that for the most part, we're operating from our subconscious mind, and our subconscious mind is constantly consuming information without us knowing, and it stores it inside. So if you never pay attention to negative emotions, as we call them negative, I think they're not negative or positive, but we kind of feel like they're negative because they bring heavy energy into our bodies. Yeah. If we keep just ignoring them and pushing them aside, what happens is that we store them inside us instead. And there were many times in my early, so to speak, climate optimist days when I would completely just lose it. I would start crying in the car or having like a tantrum, an adult tantrum. Mm-hmm. And I felt very lost in my mission and who I was supposed to be. And so what it came down to was me understanding that if I want to be an optimist, it takes work. I can't just choose to be an optimist. I have to actually create optimism. And what does that look like? It looks like every single morning waking up and telling myself that there are things I can do to make things better. I can't change the world because no one can, but I can change my world. And by changing my own world, you have no idea how much that's going to ripple effect. And so by empowering me, I mend my own anxiety. I feel more empowered. I start doing things which start creating dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins. And by having those happiness hormones floating in your body, you feel more optimistic. You feel happier. You feel like you can actually make a difference. And when you are that person, when you are the optimist walking around in the world, you have a different aura to you, a different energy. And what was interesting was that suddenly when I wasn't angry and forcing things anymore, people came to me and said that you said something to me that was really inspiring. And just so you know, I listened to your podcast 4 years ago and something you said really resonated. And now I am the one who grows my own vegetables and I always bring my own bag. So like I started to recognize that we're planting seeds all the time. And the more that we do that, we start to shift culture, we start to change norms, and we keep talking about system change and we want change. We are the system, and the fastest way to changing the system is by empowering ourselves and becoming that change. There is no knowing, like being a climate optimist is not saying to ourselves, oh, I'm absolutely certain that things are going to work out. I'm terrified still. I have no idea if we're going to figure out climate change. But my only options are either giving into despair and fear, or choosing every single day to empower myself to be the change and to choose to be the optimism that I want to see in the world and in other people. And by showing up as that, at least I'm doing what I can. And that is what being a climate optimist means to me.
Powerful. There's a lot in there that I want to address. There are at least 3 points that hopefully I can retain in my head long enough for us to get through, because they need to be explored, and I think the audience will find them enriching. And then we are going to sweep back and follow up directly on the next line of questions that your own statements lead directly into. Let's go back to the mythological theme, because there's some things embedded in what you said that relate to 2 of my favorite mythological components that speak to the fundamental human experience, and that you directly pointed to within that answer to the question that I just posed. First of all, let's talk about Freya again. Mm-hmm. Freya, like many goddesses, had multiple aspects. In fact, there are some goddesses in the Nordic pantheon that we're not even really 100% sure were separate goddesses. We think they really might have just been aspects of Freya. People just called them different names. And the reason why I mentioned that is because you mentioned in passing that there are different aspects of you inside, or that there are different Anne Thereses. And that's actually a more common experience than people acknowledge, but you're the first guest on a show that deals a lot with people exploring some of their core fundamental values, or their purposes in life, or their purpose, or deep spiritually driven components that the compartmentalization of our personality can sometimes have direct interplay with. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, the many Anne Therese's, the many aspects of you. What do you mean when you say that? How do you integrate those into your larger identity as the climate optimist?
Oh, what a great question. Well, first of all, I have a very youthful child inside of me. I love to play. I feel very young at heart. And when she comes out, I want to dance and laugh and just have a really great time. Then there's a very wise old soul in me, I feel, who comes in at times too and talks to the younger child. And then there's me, just going through all the stages in life. And sometimes she takes over, and she's unfortunately sometimes very governed by her ego, because that's all of us. Yeah. And I think when we are too in tune with our ego, we lose track with our bigger purpose. And I think that's when the child and the older lady comes in and kind of like balances that out. I think there are multiple, I don't even know what the word would be, beings, things inside me. I think they're also like our guides and some sort of support coming in. And I don't know if that's true. I can never prove that in any way, but I'll tell you this much. The day I started thinking that way, I just gained a new perspective on life, and I'm happier because of it. I feel like I'm never alone because I can talk to myself. And I think when we meditate, for example, we're trying to get in touch with that higher self, the person who knows beyond the ego, the person who's like, okay, let's just get the drama out of the picture. And like, what's really important here? What do you actually care about? What actually makes you happy? And not what is society telling you that makes you happy, but what makes you happy? And I'm actually happy to bring this up because a lot of the question I get in terms of climate change, and people always want to know, like, what is the one thing we can do to fight climate change and whatever, and how can I contribute or leave a positive impact on the planet? And I say, slow down, because when we slow down, we allow ourselves to get in touch with a higher self, the person who knows that we don't need to shop more clothes every single week to be happier. Yeah. The person who knows that we don't have to always grab the next sugar on the shelf because we need that sugar rush or whatever it is. Like, we actually have a lot more than we think we do. And the more we can get in touch with that person, we'll be happier. We'll leave a lesser footprint on the planet. And I think although we are trying to speed up climate action, which is really important because we have very little time to do this, I think part of that speeding up is doing less and slowing down. I know it's very controversial, but I think a lot of the answers we're looking for already live inside us. We just have to slow down enough to hear them.
Really interesting. So this episode is being taped in February of 2022. And for anyone who may be watching it or listening to it years down the road, this is what we're hoping, heaven forbid, is the tail end of the crisis era of the coronavirus, the COVID pandemic. Anything could happen tomorrow. In fact, I hope I haven't jinxed the whole world just by uttering those words.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, but it seems that it's slowing down in intensity a little bit. And the reason why I mention that is because over the past 2 years, all of us, as I'm sure will be well documented in history, and people will not need me to remind them about this, but we've been in some version of lockdown throughout most of the world, actually, for the past 2 years. And one thing that I've learned through this whole lockdown process is exactly what you're talking about. I don't wish poorly on any industry or other business owners. I really don't. On the other hand, my husband's cooking, like restaurants, did I really need to do takeout as much as I thought? And use all of that paper and plastic that came with that. Did we really need all of the clothes we had? We never had a lot of clothes, but really, did I need all of those clothes? No. Being at home all the time teaches you that. I wasn't able to use a lot of the public transportation that was out there, or the transportation generally. Well, bicycling is now, I don't even have a Metro card, although I've never perceived public, like the subway, as some horrible waste of energy, considering the alternatives. But bicycling is better. That's how I travel. And that might not be available to everyone, but it does go as to really hitting home, what do we need and what do we not need? And you're right. I've been thinking about it purely in financial terms, but there is a climate impact too. And it has slowed us down. It has forced us to think about some of these things.
And also, which I think is really important that we start talking about when it comes to climate change, is that it's not about stepping up and being the bigger guy or the bigger girl and being like, I'm going to be fighting for climate. It all comes back to us. It's almost like the end of the line of like, okay, I want to save money, so I'm going to bike instead of taking the train or whatever it is, or I don't have to travel across the world to have a fantastic vacation. I can stay close to home and just have more time at my hands. But like making those decisions because you want to save money or better your health because biking is better for you. If you want to eat healthier foods that are grown locally in healthy soil, all these things actually starts with taking care of you, of your family, of your community, of your economy, and making the better choices for you will have a direct impact, positive impact on climate change. And so I think that is the next phase we need to move into. It's not about being the awesome person who saved the polar bears.
Right.
It's actually taking it back to home of like, do I want to be breathing polluted air? Do I want to be, turning the tap in my sink and having to filter my water because it's just so full of toxics? Do I want to have to be concerned about the food I buy in the grocery store because they're infused with so much toxic chemicals, or they're not grown in soil that have any nutrients left? So it's like, no, of course I want to have a healthy, thriving body. Of course I want to have a healthy, thriving community. Of course I want to work less hours so I can have more time to spend with those I love. All those things come back to, well, if we do that, we can slow down more. We can appreciate what we already have right here, right now. We can spend money on things that actually matter, like nutritious foods, right? Yeah. Clean air, things that we take for granted today that are going to be hard to take for granted in just a few years. We don't need more fashion. We have enough to go around, right? So like what actually matters, and I think you said that too with COVID, we were given a second chance to rethink those values. And I think a lot of people have come to the same conclusions of like, wow, we have it pretty good right now, and there's so much to fight for. No. Let's start fighting for those things. And by doing so, we will start to address climate change at the same time.
Conversation gets richer and richer. I'm going to go back to your answer to my first question now and dig in a little deeper. That was a phenomenal response. And I love talking to people that have so much substance and are willing to bring it to the table. Thank you for that gift. So I'm going to tell a myth from a different tradition. And it's a myth people might have heard me. I don't know if I've mentioned it on this podcast before, but it's actually one of my favorite myths to tell because it's so provocative and it goes directly as to your purpose. It's the Greek myth of Pandora. Human beings lived in darkness, basically, in the earliest days of creation. The Titan, a primordial god named Prometheus, stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. And the Olympian gods were furious. So to punish humanity, they sent a woman named Pandora down to Earth. Now, Prometheus's name was Foresight. He knew that humans needed fire because he had foresight. But his brother, Epimetheus, his name meant aftersight. He didn't think ahead. And so Prometheus said to Epimetheus, don't take any gifts from the gods. Epimetheus, because he acted on impulse, took the gift of this beautiful Pandora that the gods gave to him. And as almost like a dowry, they had Pandora bring with her a jar. And she was told to never open it, no matter what. So she buried it in the backyard, and she and Epimetheus lived happily for a while. But, and I get it, I'm on Pandora's side here. Tell someone don't open a jar. Say, here's a jar, don't open it, where you can't see what's inside. Of course you're going to open the thing. And she did. And as the story goes, and as many people know, every evil brought into the world came out of that jar. Disease, death, plague, COVID, everything. And suddenly understanding what she'd done, poor Pandora shut the jar, closed the lid, slammed it down. But it was too late. Everything had escaped except one thing. It was Elpis, the spirit of hope. Why do I tell you this story? Because it's actually a very controversial one, if you think about it deeply. If the things in Pandora's jar were evil, was hope evil? By shutting the lid and keeping hope inside, was Pandora preserving it, or was she saving the world from it? Were the gods including hope in this jar of evil as an act of mercy upon humanity? Or were they viewing it as a terrible curse that if humanity had, it would plague them into doing all sorts of dangerous things? How would you interpret the Pandora myth? And do you think that hope in the face of the climate situation we're in is really something dangerous for us?
Oh, also, you're such a great storyteller. Thank you for that. I obviously I've heard of Pandora's box before. I did not know about the hope part though. That's interesting. Also, I wanted this is a side note and for a different conversation, but it's always the women who are not supposed to do something, and then we still do, and then we get punished, and we become the carrier of all the bad in the world. Same thing with Adam and Eve, and she ate the apple.
Very true, by the way. That's very, and these things are worth exploring as well. I completely agree.
That's a conversation about the male and the female. But anyways, I definitely think that she was supposed to have let hope out too, just to give some sort of mercy. I mean, I'm an optimist. I think optimism is not the same as hope, but it's very interlinked. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big fan of Jane Goodall, and she just came out with a book, The Book of Hope, that I read this fall, and it's amazing. I really recommend anyone to read it. But it's, if we don't have hope, what do we have? And I think it's the same applies as for optimism, where you can't just choose optimism. It's not like a passive thing where you set yourself on the sideline and cross your arms and say like, well, I'm just going to stay optimistic and hope something works out. That's not true optimism, and neither is that true hope. You have to sort of, if you do that, you're going to start to feel like you're just bullshitting yourself. It's going to be like, well, I'm sitting here on the sideline and what I'm seeing from here is not great. Mm-hmm. Like, I think maybe I just made a dumb decision here to be hopeful or optimistic. So I think it's by, infusing yourself into the fight and like, I'm going to show up as the change. That's the only way to actually stay optimistic or stay hopeful. But I think, I nerd out on science, like I said earlier. When it comes to optimism, there's actually, and I'm sorry I'm bringing this from hope to optimism, but optimism is sort of my field, and it's very interlinked to hope, so I just use that as instead. But optimism has a lot of science to it. If you look at the neuroscience, what goes on in our brain in terms of brain chemistry when we act from a place of optimism, and also, by the way, to all the pessimists out there or realists out there, we are optimistically biased. Majority of us are, like 84%, I think. Really? Don't quote me on the numbers, but yes. And so that's interesting to me. I'm like, okay, what is it that we are so biased to be optimistic? And what that means is that for the most part, when we think about an event that is yet to happen, so we think about the future, if that is a party on Friday night or your vacation this summer or your date on Saturday, whatever it is that you're thinking about, you are optimistically biased in a way where how you think about it is probably better than it's going to turn out to be. And so that's interesting, right? It's like, why do we do that? Like, why does the human brain work that way? And you might feel like, okay, we're just walking around fooling ourselves. Like you said, like, did they include hope just to kind of be like mean to humanity and be like, well, you think it's going to be great, but it's not going to be. But I look at it from a different lens. It's like, well, since we do think that it's going to turn out in a favorable way, since we are optimistic about the outcome, we will take the necessary bold steps sometimes to get us there. And studies have actually shown that people who are optimistic are 40% more likely to get a promotion within the next year.
Wow.
Yeah. It's also fascinating, significant numbers too on like people live longer, have less heart diseases, are healthier. And that is because if you truly believe there's a positive future to look forward to, you're going to live life now very differently. You're going to take care of yourself. You're going to work out. You're going to eat healthy foods, eat your vitamins, because you're like, I want to be around for that, right? Like I have an optimistic view on what's yet to come. If you feel like, well, we're doomed anyways, I might as well just drink my bottle and smoke and who gives a shit, right? So that makes a lot of sense. But then also, if we didn't have hope that something else is coming, if we didn't feel like there's something worth fighting for, how would we find the courage to actually step into the unknown, to move outside our comfort zones? Because any change has always come from us being able to, broaden our minds, step into something that we don't know yet, which is always uncomfortable. Humans don't like change. We need to really, work ourselves up to take those scary steps. And so how would we ever find the motivation to do so if we didn't have hope or optimism?
There's a movie called The Road that my husband and I saw. Have you seen that movie, Anne Therese?
I have not.
Okay.
No.
So basically what happens in it is what apparently is an asteroid hits the Earth. And as you can imagine, that's an environmental cataclysm. And it tracks a family, a mother and a father and a son, who are walking through this post-apocalyptic landscape to find, on a road to find maybe a place that's warm or has some plant life or something like that, because pretty much everything is ashes. And as they're in the present of the movie, the father and the son are trudging along this road. And I mean, literally, there are people cooking babies on Spitfires and like enslaving people. And it's every negative stereotype about how humans behave in the face of disaster amped up 10, 15,000 times. And the father is trudging along. He's going to survive. I can relate to him. That would be me. If there is an apocalypse, y'all, you want me around. Now, I spoke to my husband about that because the mother, the wife, in the flashbacks, she's like, basically, I don't need this shit. She puts a gun to her head and kills herself. And he's like, she's got the right idea. He's like, I don't need to be walking around in some gray forlorn apocalypse without any hope. And so, part of why I raise that is because the film is about an environmental catastrophe, which is what we're facing. And if there is a point in which it gets bad enough, do you feel like it would ever be worth just sort of being like the wife and just saying, yeah, you can have hope. Ciao, homie. Or do you feel like that optimism is important in the face of everything? Or is there some line that you draw?
Well, I think I would never draw a line for optimism. Mm-hmm. And I'll come back to my answer of being optimistic, even if you are fooling yourself, makes you happier right now. Do you want to die a happy person or someone who's just full of despair? And I think it's Edith Eger. She's a Holocaust survivor and an incredible speaker. She said sometime in some podcast I listened to, and this is, I think it's a famous story. But there was this one in one of the camps where some guy, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the story right, but this guy was like, I will be out for Christmas. I will be out for Christmas. And every day he woke up and was like, I'm great. I'll be out by Christmas. And then Christmas came and they weren't out yet. And then he died the next day or something like that. His hope didn't extend longer. But for the guy the man who said, I will be out of here one day, he didn't put a timeline to it. He actually survived and he moved on. And I think he might still be alive today. So that just speaks to that.
Wow.
Optimism and hope is tricky, and in a way we are fooling ourselves. So we're telling ourselves a story that we don't know if it's right or wrong. But if we can correct ourselves or like fact check ourselves of like, okay, if I haven't made this success in my career by this age, I'm a failure or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that age comes. And maybe the universe had a different path in mind for you. And so that wasn't what you were supposed to be doing. But if we tie our happiness to that outcome, it'll always be tricky. However, and I say this in regards to climate change because I think what we really need to start talking about is the fact that we are in this for the long haul. Yeah. Okay? A few things I really want to mention that I make sure that I mention in this podcast is that when it comes to climate change, we have already reached a ton of tipping points, and that is a threshold in the environment or in climate where once we reach that threshold, there's no going back. And so what happens is that it's going to trigger all these like ripple effects of negative actually domino effects of climate change. So once all the ices of Greenland melts, like who knows what's going to happen from there. So those are kind of like tipping points. And unfortunately, the thing about carbon dioxide is that even if we were to stop producing all of it tomorrow, there's already enough in the atmosphere to continue warming for the next decade or so. And so I think we have to remember, and now I'm getting a little heavy here, but we have to remember that things will appear as if they're getting worse. Even if we were to stop climate change tomorrow, things will still unfold as it's getting worse for a decade or so. So that's the first strip of it. And then even if we are to take positive actions, which by the way, we are moving in the right direction. We have to keep reminding ourselves that, like, COVID also propelled a lot of positive movements. Greta and her movement with Fridays for Future has propelled a lot of attention and big steps from governments around the world. And so things are happening and we are working in the right direction. Do I think we should be working faster? Yes, but it's happening. And I think what we have to remember is that for me, I'm in my 30s, early 30s, but still, this is going to be my lifetime. I may not even be around to see the world that we're building towards. It's not going to be that, okay, in 5 years from now, we will have figured out climate change and we can go back to normal or whatever it is. Like, we are in for the journey here. And so if our hope and optimism is tied to, okay, by the next COP20, COP27 coming up, like by the COP27, we need to have these new laws in line or whatever we're trying to achieve. If that is what we're tying our hope and optimism to, we will fail, most likely. We have to keep showing up for the journey. I say journey and not fight, because I don't think we're fighting here. We're going through a journey. We're on this journey together, and it will be probably decades, most likely a whole lifetime. And that is why, back to my mission, we need to stop acting from fear and start embracing curiosity, excitement, joy, and optimism. We are here to do something fantastic. We are co-creating a better world. Climate change proposes an opportunity for us to think again and look at what's working, what isn't working. How can we do better? How can we create a better future for our children and their children and their children? How can we from here use this as a turning point of just going upwards? And I think as we start addressing it that way, it's not hard to be optimistic, because every single day you get to wake up and partake in the opportunities of a better world. And that is the only way to keep finding the motivation to move forward.
I'm going to go back yet again to the answer you gave me to the first question, because it sort of circled around to something that you just said now. You talked about how you had this flash as to what your purpose was, being the climate optimist, but it was a journey to actualize that. And you used the allegory or the analogy or the metaphor, whatever the right word is, for it again when you talk about the resolution of the climate change crisis that we're in now. It's a journey. So many times people feel that they have an understanding of who or what they might possibly be here from a purpose perspective. They have that vision for what their life can be, but they don't understand how to get there. One of the things that you talked about was, and that really stuck with me, was the idea that even though you knew you were to be the climate optimist, you were crying out of frustration, or you were backsliding, to use some Southern phrasing that I knew growing up, into anger or frustration. Myself on my own journey, I find it so often hard. I feel like the obstacles that I have to get my own mission, in my case, to even figure out what my mission and purpose were, and let alone to begin to get there, have been so overwhelming. I don't know how to move past it. And then we take that out some and think about us collectively thinking about, okay, if we view one of our social purposes as maintaining or reducing the amount of carbon as well as other toxic gases that we're releasing too fast into the atmosphere, and hopefully reversing or at least stopping some of the disastrous outcomes that can happen, what tools do you have for us as people that you've learned from your own journey to get from the idea of being a climate optimist or an optimist with regards to your personal purpose and actually making that vision something that is true? What does the road look like? Or how do you get folks to be able to step on that road?
Thank you for asking me this question. And I want to say something here that I want you to pay close attention to and preferably remember.
I'm
okay?
scared now.
No, listen. Awareness hurts, and that's okay.
Mm.
I'll say it one more time. Awareness hurts, and that's okay. Because here's the deal. Yeah.
You're beating me up.
See, here's the deal. When you awaken to the reality of the world, right now we are in, excuse my French, a shit show. The world is a shit show. Things are falling apart. That's great. We need things to fall apart. It's not sustainable. It's not working. Let it fall apart so we can build something better. But we're in the midst of the crazy right now, in the chaos, in the pain. And there's a lot of things coming to surface from, social justice to racial justice to climate justice. And all these things need to happen at the same time. So there's a lot right now. Give yourself a break because there's a lot going on and we're all being affected one way or another. We may not pay attention to it, but we can feel it. If we really start to slow down, we can feel that. And so when you start to become aware of the world, of a future, of all the things that we're facing, it can be really painful. Yeah. It hurts. And I tried for many years to not pay attention to that pain, and it doesn't work. The only way to empower yourself and the only way to be a true optimist is to tell yourself awareness hurts and that's okay. And that means tending to yourself, because the only way to heal the world is by healing yourself first. If you want to help to heal others, you have to be healed first. And I don't say that in a way where like heal it and be on with it, but it's a practice like everything else. Yeah. And there will be days when you are tired, when you do not feel optimistic, when you're frustrated. You may have just learned something or been in a conversation with someone, an argument, and you're drained and you don't feel like you are the person who's going to change the world. And that is totally fine. That is also why I call it a journey. I prefer it to be a road trip, because when we go on a road trip, we usually have friends in the car. We take turns driving. We can take a nap. We can stop. It's all about, taking our time. It's a road trip. And it's important to think about it this way because, again, it's not going to happen overnight. This is a journey that we're on. But in order to keep going, self-care is essential. And so if you are someone who is dealing with climate anxiety, and you might be because the numbers are raging right now, it's pretty sad, but it's good that we're talking about it. If you're someone who deals with climate anxiety, I have been for probably 15 years, journal on it, acknowledge that you feel these ways. I usually say, write a hate letter to the world, everything that you're upset about, even if you're part of the problem, because you are, it's kind of hard to come to terms of like, well, I hate that we're polluting the earth. I hate that have all this plastic and shit around. And then you go to the store and you buy plastic and you take a car. So like, you're very much part of the problem. That's also okay. You can still write a hate letter to the world, even though you're part of the problem. So start there, get it out. And then you can also talk about it with people, by the way. I really highly recommend that there are circles now for climate anxiety, or just call a friend and be like, I'm really worried about climate change. No. But then you have to come to recognize that you do not have to stay in those heavy emotions to make a difference. Remember how I used to be an angry activist? I thought the only way to make a difference was to kind of like, keep growing in that lava of pain and anger. And fear and grief and anger are very powerful emotions that we can use to our advantage if we just funnel them the right way. But let them empower you. But then you have to bring in a little bit of optimism, some sort of joy, because the only way to make a difference is by healing yourselves, finding ways to let that out. If that's boxing or running or yelling, if you're in the woods, then you can yell, journaling or crying. That's why I said crying is so important. It's okay to cry. It's just emotions that have to come through us. So let that go. Find ways to funnel that energy outwards. But then the best way to step out of anxiety and into empowered action is by doing something. Become part of the change every single day. It can be small or big. It can be joining a community effort, a grassroots movement. It can be as small as buying a water bottle and refilling that over buying a plastic bottle every day at the store. Those small actions will start to add up and you will feel like, look at this. I'm actually part of the transition. I'm part of the change. What else can we do? And so you start building on that, and it's just one day after the other.
Longtime listeners to this show or viewers may be a little bit puzzled about a format change in this episode. Usually, I start off the episode by talking about the pillars of this season, which relate to changes in how people throughout the world are addressing ethics or their spirituality or meaning and purpose in light of the changes that a lot of the historical institutions that have historically connected people as they go on those journeys are themselves undergoing. And so I conceptually throw out some terms at the beginning of most episodes, like the silent revolution, which is my sort of shorthand for the changes around how people are processing spirituality, purpose, and ethics. But then I also talk about the secret plague, which is alienation. Alienation from the self, but also, and more significantly, alienation from people as a community have been driving, at least partially, some of the decline in these institutions, but they've also been bringing around a lot of problems. Now, the lockdowns that we have been experiencing over the past 2 years due to the COVID pandemic has accelerated some of those mental health and cultural issues. But they were at a critical stage even before COVID came along, just to give us that extra little kick in the rear end. And those who might not have listened to too many episodes may be wondering why on earth I'm having you here. And a year ago, I would have asked, why on earth would I ask Anne Therese Gennari to be on this show? Because she talks about optimism, she talks about climate change. That I care about it, I'm interested in it. What does it have to do with the topic of the show? I mean, I like you, but I don't believe in having people on this show for no reason whatsoever outside of just me personally liking them. Yet, I want to explain why, because it goes as to the next series of questions, and we've talked about this a little bit off camera. Right from the beginning of this episode, or of this season, I mean, climate change repeatedly came up. The first episode of this season was an interview with a neuroscientist who had a near-death experience. And he talked about the neuroscience around near-death experiences and the separation between the consciousness and the human body. What comes up during the discussion? Climate change. The next episode, we have an atheist who is the founder of the world's first secular studies program. What does he start talking about? Climate change. We have a person, a guide who talked about his whole journey into Native American and indigenous spirituality. He wants to talk about climate change. Every time, no matter what the subject is, for a while, it seemed every time I turned around, climate change came up. I had ethicists of all stripes, climate change. I think all of them, even a business ethicist, wanted to talk about climate change over and over and over. So talking about surrendering like you did earlier, I gave up. Okay. The world keeps telling me that a climate change person needs to be on this show. It keeps coming up, and then along came you. I didn't want a scientist who would just talk about a bunch of data, but someone who was a little bit more accessible and who could speak from and in a language that relates to the themes of this show around this issue. So for those of you who were like me, skeptical for many years about paying attention to the universe, okay, this is another situation where I've learned to just tap. The right person came in, and you're giving a fascinating interview. The reason why I raise all of this, though, is because you talk about science. Although you haven't upplayed that during this conversation, you know the science, you are clearly familiar with it, that's your line of work. But at the same time, you also are very conversant about it in terms of its impact on us culturally and in terms of our spiritual lives, or the lives, even if you're not a spiritual person, the part of us that connects with something bigger. Are you saying in all of this, because I sometimes suspect this and would love to just hear your thoughts on it, throwing data at people, talking about this in such clinical terms, it doesn't mean anything. I read a book called The Ends of the World, which is about the history of mass extinctions in this world. Okay? All of them were related to shifts in the carbon in the environment. Even the dinosaurs, what that asteroid did is it shifted the carbon balance. It was so overwhelming, I couldn't act. I was paralyzed with terror. And you're speaking a language that might be, I don't know, the facts they can be alienating as well as overwhelming. How have you learned to bridge that gap?
I love that you bring this up because I do teach this actually in my Climate Optimist class when I do teach my class, is that numbers are powerful because they really speak truth to power. We can see right away what's going on. However, it doesn't really translate into action. Like you said, it can stir a lot of fear and anxiety and frustration and anger even. And I come from a background in marketing, by the way. And so I've learned from marketing that if you want to get people to get action, don't come at them with negative shit. Yeah. You never see a commercial saying, if you don't buy this, you're going to smell like a stinker. It's like, no, buy this deodorant. You're going to smell amazing. Like you want to strive towards something. And this has everything to do with psychology. And so it's interesting that we know so much about human psychology and action and when we take action and not. Yet when it comes to climate change, when we really are trying to stir so much action, we're doing the opposite. We're telling people what will happen if we don't act. We're scaring people with facts and figures of the future that we hopefully are not going to be heading into, but that we are racing towards right now. And what happens to an individual? It paralyzes us. It's like, I want to act, but what am I supposed to do? And not even that. I have something what I call the route to awareness overwhelm. And usually what goes is that you start to, like, you watch a documentary about plastic in the oceans and awareness is sparked. It's painful. And then you all revved up and say, this is awful. This cannot be happening. We need to change this. And then the next day you start talking about it to people and you learn more things. It's not just about you. It's about governments and corporations and laws and all these things. And like, you are just a small fish in a very huge pond and you have very little power to do something. And very soon you end up in stage 4, which is overwhelm. And someone who's overwhelmed is not going to do much. Yeah. It's just not how it goes. And so data, although it's powerful, doesn't spark the action needed. And not only that, data can be powerful if presented the right way and back to the psychology of optimism over fear. But what we really need to do is start talking about what are the alternatives. And I love to talk about change because first of all, I don't think we know what's coming for us. We don't know how much change we're looking at right now. We have no idea. If we think the pandemic brought us change, that was just a warm-up. Everything is about to change. Get ready for it. But that doesn't mean it has to be bad. What if change is actually what we want? Maybe we want things to change. Maybe that's better for us. And so instead of talking about how can we avoid the negative change that climate change brings? Instead of trying to spark action by talking about that, how do we create a vision of a better tomorrow and spur the action towards creating that future instead?
And Therese, is climate change a spiritual issue or is it purely a scientific one?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it checks one box and not the other, but I think it's very spiritual. Because it comes down to human beings, I mean, the earth will survive. If you look at you read the book, every extinction, the earth is still here.
The rocks are just fine.
Right. And like already there's new fungi being kind of, evolving that can actually consume plastic, which is amazing.
Really?
It was one of my optimism moments. I'm like, yes. So like, even if we keep dumping shit onto the earth will find a way to take care of it at some point. It might take millions of years, but it'll be fine. Mm-hmm. The sad part is that we're taking a lot of other species with us. Right now, 1 million species are at the brink of extinction. We've lost 50% of all animals since the 1970s on the earth, which is awful numbers. So
astounding.
That is what brings me most, pain is the fact that it's not just humans, but we're taking a lot of other life with us.
Biological diversity going down. I mean, that's just not good for any ecosystem.
No, and the ecosystems are, we're relying on the ecosystems to have a stable climate. So it all is interlinked as well. But the reason it's spiritual is because it comes down to us. What do we want? What is the life that we want to live in? And I think I talk sometimes on generational amnesia, which is basically the idea that we pass on this amnesia that I don't know what it was like in the 1950s. There were a lot more birds in the sky, but I don't know what that sounds like. I don't know what it's like to go swim in the river where there's fish everywhere. Like we don't know what we're missing if we haven't been around for it. And so that is kind of powerful and also scary in itself. And so I think it's spiritual in the sense where I think it'll take a spiritual awakening. It's not just about finding the right science or the new, extract a new mineral from the earth that can create this new amazing product. Like that needs to happen also. But even if we were to completely switch to renewable energy and only have electrical cars and all these things, it still is not enough because we as humans needs to change. We have to rethink our values and how we want to live our lives here on earth. And so it's very much a spiritual issue.
Anne Marie, I don't know why I keep saying Anne Marie. I worked with someone for years named Anne Marie, and I have such affection for her. So anyone listening to her watching this, I know your name is actually Anne Therese.
Thank you.
Being aware is painful. Being aware hurts. Awareness hurts.
Yes.
Let me just say, Anne Therese, how can people find out more about you? Where can they go to join your communities or get more involved? Sort of not be paralyzed as much and maybe begin to move into a place of optimism.
Yes, please come find me. So my website is theclimateoptimist.com. On Instagram, I'm Anne Therese Gennari, so just my name. On Twitter, I'm Anne Therese _G. So similar. And my podcast is Hate Change Podcast. Please come listen, come find me, reach out. I'm happy to have conversations.
I love it. And Therese, it has been great taking a ride with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And for everyone tuning in, if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple or a comment on YouTube. And I shall see you next time for another ride down the Purpose Highway. When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is.